Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our webinar on the Customer Journey Revolution. I'm Mark Alvarez, the Managing Director of ABN Impact Insights Consulting Philippines, and I will be your host and moderator for today's webinar. With consumer expectations rising and constantly evolving, delivering top customer experience is really difficult. And our leaders continue to ask us on how we can keep a finger on the pulse of our consumers so that we can truly build customer-centric experiences. In today's session, our aim is to share a bit of inspiration for a new CX practice. We're talking about a revolution. So what we'll do is to share some of our thinking behind the building blocks of a next generation CX program and how these could be used by CX leaders like yourself to really promote a customer-centric mindset within your organization. I will be joined by Scott Lee, Senior Client Partner, and Maz Amiramadi, CEO, ABN Impact Insights Consulting, who will share stories on how brands have gone through or are still going through this journey. And in fact, as a company, we also go through this revolution. Customer journeys has been part of our very own DNA. To stay true to our promise of empowering people to shape the future of brands, we continuously engage with our consumers and stakeholders through the use of our proprietary community technologies to further understand their own journeys, unlocking different opportunities that can further enhance their customer experience. And as a testament of such practice, we're proud to share that more than a third of the world's best brands continue to value the relationship that we've built with them throughout these years. Not only in Europe, but more so in Asia, including the likes of Standard Chartered Bank, Cathay Pacific, and Pure, helping brands to really stay close with their customers. So, what could be the building blocks of a next generation customer experience? Three things. The first one is extreme customer obsession. The second one is all about extreme speed. And the third one, extreme creativity. So let's go through each one by one. So what is extreme customer obsession? Many of us are actually guilty of the fact how we remain to be fixated talking about touch points, measuring satisfaction levels per touch point on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis even, always going through all the touch points that are presented in a nice dashboard. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what remains to be an area which all of us need to own more is on the actionability of the movements that we see in that dashboard. More importantly, we need to sharpen our ability to deliver on the moments that truly matter. Because not all moments are equally important. Some may have a stronger effect on the overall customer experience. So take this airline example. So across the whole airline travel journey from pre-flight to post-flight, a critical moment of truth that was identified is all about transferring. So KLM partnered with us to have a better understanding of this transferring moment with the goal of developing potential solutions that can address whatever pain points that can be identified within that moment. Through a customer community approach, we were able to collect and curate hundreds of actual transferring stories from frequent travelers. And what surprised us is that many of these observations did not take place in the airport. Rather, it happened on the aircraft before they landed in the airport where they had to transfer. So the learning here is that many of these travelers are actually insecure, even on board, whether they will get their connecting flight. So KLM had to really rethink, how can I actually extend this current transfer touch point or this current transfer experience that I provide to my customers? So it's not only about wayfinding or putting signage in the airport, but actually they need to think, I need to make sure that that transfer experience starts in the plane. So from this example, we really need to step back now and rethink how we are viewing our current journey maps. We need to proactively involve our customers in the rethinking of these journeys. further understand the change in their thinking, their change in behavior, the movement of their feeling, of their emotions and doing, so that we develop in the process a deep love for the customer. And that's extreme customer obsession. We co-create, we go through their journey, not from a lens that they are far from us, but actually we are with them in the journey. Next is all about extreme speed. Challenge is that all of this is actually happening in a rapidly changing world, so there's little time. Many brands seek new methods and practices to help them forward or accelerate their innovation agenda to stay true and relevant to their customers. Bosch, for example, had one mission, and it's to come up with a new power tool. But the catch is they were only given 2 weeks. So within that period, we helped them create a 2-week program that allowed us to actually explore, ideate, test, and validate, following an iterative approach to ensure we land on a winning product concept, but at the same time still meeting the business deadlines set by management. Clearly, there is really that need for faster, more efficient, and agile insighting to help drive better and faster strategy formulation and decision making. And lastly, it's all about extreme creativity. Bring in a culture of experimentation. It's okay to launch a prototype which may not yet be finished. You may actually do this in a controlled way anyway. Just make sure that you are able to collect feedback as you further improve. So it's about installing that loop of testing, learning, adopting, testing, learning, adopting, and also facilitate and encourage a culture of openness, to bring in fresh, creative, and outside ideas that can make your brand and your offers really cutting edge and relevant to your customers. But the big question that remains is that while many are already going and embarking on this journey, the question is how deep are companies really going? Because nowadays, it's not really hard to find companies who are saying that, I am customer centric, we are customer centric, but to find companies who actually do it in a deep, meaningful way is a little harder. Many are actually just saying that, many are basically skin deep. Some are going deeper to the culture and processes, but few have really. So I guess, to give and bring life to these concepts, let us share with you some inspiration from companies that may be further along the journey. So Scott will share how Volkswagen established a new CX practice to really focus on moments that matter, and Maz will then share how AIA gives importance to their customers, propelling them to the forefront of decision making. During the session, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A tab found on the right side of your screen, and we'll go through the questions after Maz's sharing. So now let's welcome Scott.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for a great introduction. So I'm going to be sharing a case study we have in the automotive industry, particularly for a brand here, which Mark mentioned, which is Volkswagen. Now, I have to admit, I'm proud to say that my first car when I was 16 was a Volkswagen Golf. So, quite proud to say that, but not so proud to say that my second car was a Toyota, unfortunately. But in some senses, that underscores the problem that Volkswagen had when they approached us here, because very much different cars were becoming much more homogeneous, and brands like Toyota were competing more and more with Volkswagen. So VW, they decided that to keep differentiating, they needed to shift focus to more the customer experience rather than just the product. Now, I'd say that you'll see this with Maz's case study in a minute on the AIA case study, but I have to say things have changed a lot since I started doing research, probably, well, too long to remember now, but it was really very much about research projects, wasn't it, 10, 20 years ago. But I think nowadays projects have changed and they've turned into programs, and this is very true of the Volkswagen case we had here. It wasn't just to do research on the journey, it was also to help them change the whole organisation, and help to transform VW into a much more consumer-centric business. And so this particular study was conducted in Europe, by our colleagues in Europe, and the test market for this program was in Poland, which is an emerging market, so quite fast growing. And the idea was that they also wanted to scale this customer experience program into other markets. So it's a bit of a test market situation. So let me share a little bit more about how we went about it. So it wasn't just about research. It was about transforming an organization. So you can imagine that we might have to do things a little bit differently from the ways we've done things in the past. And one of the things that we did was we started by looking at the customer experience, in this case, the journey of buying and owning a car and then buying another car. And we looked at it not from an internal perspective, where perhaps you might list out the touch points and then define the steps from the organizational point of view. We started by looking at it from the consumer's perspective, using a theory called jobs to be done. Now, if you haven't come across jobs to be done, Jtbd Theory, it's very simple. What it says is that people don't buy the product or service, they buy what it helps them to accomplish. So they don't buy a drill, for example, they buy the ability to put a hole in the wall. And in fact, they don't buy the ability to put a hole in the wall, they buy the ability to put a nice painting up or even to create a home that they're proud of. So this is what we mean by focusing on the consumer's needs and outcomes first, having a much more outside-in perspective, I would say. So rather than start with touch points, we started by looking at a holistic view of the journey of buying and owning a car. And we looked at all the moments that happen as you consider buying a car, you buy that car, it gets delivered. And from a consumer perspective, what are all the key moments that are happening? And what are the needs that they have throughout that whole journey? What are the jobs that they're trying to get done throughout that whole journey? So that was our kind of approach, very much an outside-in approach. How did we actually start to build the journey? Let's take a look. So some of you who've done journey mapping may know this, but it's an obvious thing. But you know, the one thing you can't do is just jump straight into talking to consumers. Most companies have already got a lot of information. They've got a lot of different knowledge that already sits in the business. So, and that was true here. VW headquarters and also VW in Poland had a lot of internal knowledge that we had to harvest first. We had to figure out what they already knew, what they wished they knew, and of course sometimes what they didn't know they didn't know. So, and we also needed to understand the local context. So we did things like dealer interviews, looked at the trends. Poland, in this case, is a very rapidly growing market. So it means that in the dealerships, there's a lot of people wanting to buy cars. So they're often quite rushed off their feet, for example. So that creates a certain service nature and context that we have to appreciate. So first thing was to understand what we knew already and what we didn't know. And then we had to step into the consumer's shoes. And many of you know us as an insight community company, so this would be no surprise to many of you that we used an online community platform, in this case our proprietary platform, which is called the Consumer Square. And hopefully you can see it sort of playing around in the background here with this video. And very much this is an online platform where we brought together 200 VW car owners and also considerers, so people who had other cars but would consider a VW car in future. And we kind of kept them in this online community for a number of weeks and even months, as it turned out, so that we could really understand and keep going back to them to understand different aspects of the car buying and after sales journey. We don't have time to go into all of the different questions we asked them, but just to give you a sense, over just even the first 3-week engagement period, we did a lot with these 200 consumers. So just simple things like running a blog on what are the best parts of buying a car, what are the worst parts. We got people to exchange views in forums about what would be the ideal process for buying a car. We sent them on missions like mystery shops. So we asked some of them to go and check out websites that they might use to inform the consideration process. We ask some of them to go and do test drives, go to the dealership. So you can imagine over that 3-week period, we're talking to 200 people, and we're able to talk to them in a lot more detail. We get a lot of data over that 3-week period through many different activities. Now, collecting the insights is one thing, and in the past that used to be basically job done, didn't it? But times have changed, and it's very much about how you bring those insights into the organization now. And we have another proprietary platform, which is called the Insight Activation Studio, which we used in this program. And you can see it in the middle of this screen. And essentially, it's a bit like I guess a Pinterest for insights, if I can call it that, with all these tiles that you can populate with all the interesting observations that you're getting from your consumer research, in this case from our Square Insight community of consumers. So we're continually populating observations, building insights with the client stakeholders through our activation studio here. And that's really great. It creates a backbone to the program, whilst we're also doing workshops. We're also kind of giving our client teams some different team tasks and so on and so forth. So it keeps everyone abreast of the knowledge and the insights that are coming, and helps them to also contribute their initial thoughts and suggestions. So that's quite a few things we're doing here differently. Technology, the jobs to be done theory, different ways we were really trying to create a more substantive program to drive consumer centricity. But what did we find out? So let me give you a bit of a sense of what did we discover from the consumers whilst we were working with them in this way. Well, like many journeys, usually you start, what you normally get out is kind of overarching needs. Now, the car buying journey is a really, it can last a year sometimes, and it's a real roller coaster actually, because as you can imagine, in the first phases you might be quite excited about the possibilities, but then when you get in the dealership you get easily confused by the options. So it's quite a rich tapestry of different types of emotions and needs that go on across that whole car buying journey. And we broke those down into, as we said, the jobs to be done. So at the key moments of this whole holistic car buying journey, we listed 26 different jobs to be done for the consumer as they're going through the moments of this journey. So you can see some examples here. For example, at the consideration stage in red, one of the jobs is to be well informed about the car you're buying. As you go through the process, perhaps you go to signing and doing the deal, you want to get the most of the deal, make sure you're really getting value, and so on and so forth. So as people go through this kind of loyalty loop of having the car delivered, driving it away, and then eventually coming back for a new car after several years. There are a variety of jobs to be done from a consumer perspective. And to give you a sense of also deliverables as well, for each of those jobs to be done from that holistic journey, we look at these kind of power sheets, I guess you might call them, which we give to the client. So you can see for this particular job that I highlighted, which is in the consideration step of being, I want to be well informed about the cars I consider. You can see we in the power sheets, we start to list, some of the specific needs, which is in this case, transparency, very important, but also guidance and feeling empowered. We also have friction, so not having the right information, the right languages is a real irritation for people. Pushy sales staff when you're still trying to consider your options is also an irritation. And in these power sheets, we also have the internal perspective of the touch points that the client felt were delivering this particular step or moment, and also some initial thoughts on, well, if we were to address this particular need or job to be done, how would it benefit our business? So just to give you a flavour, now you can imagine with 26 jobs to be done and 26 power sheets, that's a lot of problems for VW to address, frankly. So prioritization is also really important. People often ask me, how do you prioritize, how do you validate a journey? Well, this is one way you can validate a journey. When you've got all those consumer needs and jobs to be done, you can go back to your consumers, in this case, the 200 we have on the community, and you can ask them, how important are these different needs in buying a car. How well does VW perform on these? How much will these influence your next purchase, and so forth? And you can end up with a strategic matrix that looks something like this, which obviously helps the team to prioritize which of those jobs to be done they should focus on. Not only that, though, the beauty of a community is when you find a job to be done within the journey, in that holistic journey, that you think, actually, that's really important. You can go back to people on the community and you can deep dive into the micro journey that sits behind that. So I've got an example here for you. Again, for that particular job I mentioned before, I want to be well informed about the cars. We went back to the community, did interviews with people who were going through that particular moment, if you like. And you can see, you can zoom in, and there are a variety of peaks and troughs just for that jobs to be done. You know, where information is not clear, or stock, overview of stock when you're considering, is the car in stock, is a frustration. Things like the car configurator are a delight. People like to play around with how they can configure the car, and so on and so forth. You can really zoom into some of these kind of pains and gains that sit within a journey. We always say there are journeys within journeys. So at this stage in the whole program, you can see we had unearthed quite a lot of information about all the needs across this whole buying and owning journey. I don't know, that's why this is a workshop that we did at this point in the process. Everyone looks a little bit depressed here. I have to say, I'm not sure whether they're depressed or they're sort of worried about all these different problems that they can potentially solve for the consumer. But we try to make it fun. So you can see there's a kind of a board game of these, and try and help the client to prioritize which of those they're going to work on. Really important to decide which problem you're going to solve before you start bringing creativity in. And indeed, in this case, they decided that, right, we're going to focus on two particular jobs to be done in the first phase. They went on to others in subsequent phases, but the two that they went on here were the one I mentioned before: be well informed about the cars that you're considering, and then the deal stage, getting most out of the deal. So those were the first focus, if you like. The reason those were, I guess, decided on, well, this was, again, remember, this was a kind of a test process. And the team really wanted to get some quick wins to begin with, which they could convince senior management that they could continue this process with other jobs which might be, more challenging. For example, the maintenance type would involve, wider parties, wider stakeholders. So they picked these two because they could affect sales, but also they felt they could get some quick wins to convince management to keep investing in this customer-centric program. So at this stage, they knew which problems they were going to start to try and solve at this first phase. They knew which ones they were going to leave to later. But how do we develop the ideas? So let's move into kind of the creative phase. Well, I think this is very common, I have to say, with many projects. We identify the needs, we identify the pain points within the journey, and then usually a client will do some kind of ideation amongst their internal stakeholders. And indeed, this is what happened in this case. And we did everything we could. We did a whole day workshop with the internal stakeholders. We asked them to go and immerse, put themselves in the shoes of the customers by visiting dealerships and testing the car configurators for different brands, and really making sure they understood those jobs to be done. But I have to say, at the dinner at the end of that sort of day of internal brainstorming, it was a bit subdued. It was a bit, client was a bit disappointed because some of the ideas were, kind of the same old. And I think that's always the risk when you rely just on your own internal kind of stakeholders to generate the ideas. And actually, at that dinner, the client decided, right, we need to get some external help here. So what did we do after that? We actually turned back to the community, so reignited the community of consumers, the 200 consumers that had helped us map the journey, and we went back to them for our ideas. And they were, just for one of these jobs to be done, they were able to give us 85 ideas. And then we also went to one of our other proprietary solutions or products, which is our global AIA community of creatives, 400,000 creatives all around the world. And we often use them at just this step to get those out of the box ideas that where clients are struggling to kind of think out the box so much. So, and we were able to get 70 more kind of out of the box ideas here. So you can see we suddenly went from almost just around 10 ideas to almost 150 ideas on how to address one of these jobs to be done. So lots of ideas, then things ignited again. So basically we brought the client back in. Now we had an ideation workshop with lots of ideas to sift through, to map, to prioritize, to build on. And not only that, it was a 2-day workshop, and because we got the community, again an advantage of communities, overnight we can screen some of those ideas with the 200 people on the community, so that when the client comes back in the morning, there's also a prioritization from a consumer perspective, not just an internal perspective. So again, bringing consumers in throughout this process. And not only that, of course, ideas is one thing, but you need to turn ideas into concepts. You need to flesh them out, you know, describe them more, visualize them, put the main features in, so on and so forth. Now, this was quite a challenging part of the process for the stakeholder team. We had 40 stakeholders involved here, and they were kind of tasked to create a concept, to own a concept each, which is very important. But they had to present it to the CEO of Volkswagen in Poland. I think it was quite a stressful experience for many of them, but maybe a good thing. But certainly what we did to help was, whilst they were developing their concepts, we made sure that the consumer community was still available to all the breakout teams, so they could do kind of 48-hour challenges with the consumers to show them the concepts they were working on, make sure that they were putting in the you know, kind of the must-have features, so that when they presented it to their CEO at the end of the week, they could say, look, we haven't just made this up, we've kept testing and cycling it with consumers as we've gone forward. So that was quite stressful for some of them, but quite a good thing. Okay, so where did we all end up here? So we've been through it's quite a lot of different things going on here. But at this first phase, what was kind of the result? Well, at the first stage, just focused on just 2 of those pre-sales jobs to be done. We ended up developing 11 concepts, of which there are 5 here. I'll show you the other 6 in a minute. There were 11 concepts which were developed into final prototypes. These 5 were addressing that jobs to be done I mentioned, which is being informed in the consideration step. So you had things like here, they had a concierge, an online concierge, which sort of like a friend to guide you through that sales journey. They had a real test drive, you know, not just for an hour. You could take the car away for 3 days and drive it to France if you wanted, and various different other things. And then at the deal making stage, we also had some concepts which were developed into prototypes. Things like here, the friends and family program. So, you know, if multiple family members have a Volkswagen car, you get extra benefits, you feel like you're getting a better deal. Guaranteed on-time car delivery. You know, you feel like you've been sort of cheated a bit if it turns up late, don't you? But guaranteed that it's going to be there on time. You know, you drive your new car away, you're worried about scratches, not anymore, because you get free insurance. And that all helps to satisfy that sense you're getting a really good deal at that point of the car buying journey. So those were just examples of the concepts which were developed, and those were subsequently, as I said, developed into prototypes to again test with customers and consumers, and they were developed in VW Home, which is shown here in the picture, which is a really cool kind of concept studio in Warsaw in Poland. Like a showroom where you know, new ideas, new prototypes are brought together and shown to consumers, and we then subsequently went through sort of that sort of service testing, product testing, prototyping stage. So just to kind of bring my sharing to a bit of a wrap up. I guess this is an example of a client who I would say has used a customer journey mapping and experience development process in a very full sense. I wouldn't imagine all of our clients, do all of those things, but I think it's an interesting example where it really shows when you have, technology, when you've got a community, you've got Insight Activation Studio, when you've got all the pieces in place, you can really start to do more of a programmatic type of investigation, which really brings both the stakeholders and the consumers together and enables you to keep going back to build on your insights, build on the needs, and then to test the ideas, the concepts through to refining the prototypes. And that's really what we mean by driving customer centricity. So it's not a one-off project like we used to do years ago. It's very much a program. And then just to finish off, I guess this really sums up from the client here, from Arta. He basically said, look, remember, throughout the whole process where you're developing or designing new services, new experiences, don't go too far away from the insights. Don't go far from the consumer. They're the most important kind of voice to keep you on track as you go through this process. So thanks very much. I'll be around for questions at the end. I hope it was interesting.
Thank you, Matt and Scott, for sharing those wonderful case studies. So maybe just do a bit of a quick recap. So again, just going back to the identified building blocks of the next generation customer experience, we have 3: extreme obsession, customer obsession. So we need to really have that shift of thinking. So similar to the Volkswagen case, it's really moving that mindset from a touch points view to a deep understanding of the moments that truly matter. We really need to prioritize what are the critical things or moments that we need to address, from a solutions-based approach to a more of a needs-based approach, which we can hope can really shape and create that impact on the experiences that are truly significant to our customers' lives at an individual level. And speaking of extreme speed and extreme creativity, it's really best to work on an iterative, agile approach and leverage on that out-of-the-box thinking. Be bold to experiment and try out new things. And again, iterate in the process, launch and test new services. Processes like what AIA did, it's a long, it's a journey in itself, So facilitate that test and learn environment, which, can lead to actually new innovations. And speaking of innovations, shameless plug, we are having another webinar this coming July 30th. So talking about what established innovators can learn from successful disruptors. We'll be talking about our point of view and share with you some stories on innovation. So we hope we see you there. Okay, right. So now let's move on to the Q&A, and thank you for sharing some of the questions they posted already. So maybe let's kick it off with the first question. So I guess this one, I'll share this with Scott. Scott, there's a question on what is our understanding, or how can we actually link customer journeys to total ownership experience, that concept. Do you think this is similar or are actually presented in different terms? What's your point of view on this concept?
Yeah, I think, well, you can see from the VW case that the way that they wanted to approach it was to very much link the two things together, I guess, the buying journey with the ownership journey. And that loop you saw, I guess, as we call a loyalty loop. That's, I guess some of you may have seen that from Google, or for example from McKinsey, see journeys in that kind of circular fashion. I know sometimes we visualize them as more of a left to right thing, but I guess that is the benefit. Ultimately, when you're looking at the kind of the journey holistically, often brands do try and step back and see the whole thing in totality. And as I said, when you're looking at, there are journeys within journeys. So just because you look at the kind of the holistic journey with everything in it, of course, it doesn't mean you need to solve all of those issues, and you don't need to go into depth on all those things in one go. You can zoom into certain aspects of the pre-sales journey or the after-sales journey. But I think seeing them together, at least to begin with, as a holistic view, is helpful, I would say.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Scott. And I think it's actually, again, related to just understanding what are to be solved in that total experience of the customer. And I guess linking it now to the second question, which I'll ask Mas to share his point of view, is that, you know, there's that question of, I guess, looking at that top-down, bottom-up objectives, you know, rooted on objectives. There's this question of what, you know, are the types of problems that are best tackled alongside the consumers. So does it work equally well, or should there be more or less a tangible result or outcome that needs to be achieved, right? So is it, you know, I need to generate brand awareness, I need to lift the bottom line numbers, or is it really the company-owned generated initiatives that would actually solve these problems? So how do you actually then inject and make sure that the customers are there?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got an exact answer for that question, but one thing I think is worthwhile thinking. I think quite often what we observe is that we are very quick to jump to solutions, and you know, part of I mean, we do it all the time. You know, maybe we're watching a live chat of customers, or we get you know, some feedback from customers, consumers, whatever it is, and immediately we start thinking about solution. Okay, let's do this, let's do that, and we jump into trying to solution. And I think, you know, one of the things that within the process that we often try to do is to separate out that solutioning a little bit from the identifying the right problem. So we talk about, you know, let's first identify the right problem and then fix the problem right. You know, separating those two things out. And so I think that's kind of the only word I would have on that particular question. If we can manage to separate that out, make sure that we've really considered all of the challenges before we go on to solutioning, I think it's a continual challenge for most of us.
Yeah.
Can I just add as well, if possible? Yep. I think it's also often we slip into thinking of our own problems, our organizational problems, which is obviously important, but ultimately being consumer centric is about defining the consumer problems or the consumer needs. And so jobs to be done is the consumer's jobs to be done in the journey. It's not our organizational jobs to be done. So I think if you start from that kind of outside in perspective, then it's always relevant to the consumer.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Miles. Actually, another interesting question, and I think it can be applied not only to AIA, but Volkswagen. It's really more of a question about differentiation. Like, for example, in the AIA example, it's not just AIA who is actually on the move, no, or then that transition from payer to partner, but other insurers as well. So if we are actually, I mean, all the insurers are basing on the same insights, I guess, on the same consumer needs that were identified in that market, how do you actually then, I guess, create that differentiating, you know, what could be that differentiating move for that company?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question and a challenge. Honestly, I don't think we necessarily have the absolute answer for that. But I think one thing we know more than ever now is that things are changing so rapidly. You know, we can't expect things to stay the same anymore. And the events of the past few months obviously have put that into a higher speed than ever before. And that's where keeping in touch with the evolution of the customer is so important. You know, being fast, being quick to market, obviously that's needless to say, having that, you know, as you said, Mark, you know, having that extreme agility, extreme speed to market is a differentiating point that we need to have. But yeah, our competitors will follow suit. You know, if we've hit the right thing, our competitors will follow suit quite quickly. And so, you know, having the finger on the pulse of the evolution of the customer is essential. Being prepared to change things on a continual basis. I think that's something we're all feeling in business. You know, we're all having to evolve quicker and quicker than ever before.
Yeah, and I guess just to share a bit on that also is, I think we can actually leverage on the creativity or on that out of the box thinking, I guess, practice as well. I mean, most of the great ideas are actually coming out from outside the industry where you are actually operating in, right? So if you can actually draw inspiration from other categories, from outside, say finance or from insurance, and draw that inspiration. And again, it always goes back to the consumer need. What is that need that we need to solve and address for the consumer? And I think if we are able to crack that and address that, then definitely that service will be anyway experienced by the customer. Okay, just a final question, and maybe I'll just try to wrap everything together, just conscious of time, is there's a question on how do you actually then maintain that online community? I mean, how do you actually engage with them? I guess not only from a community member perspective, but also how did you then balance the engagement with your clients, with your internal clients? Because I think there's that interaction between the clients and the consumers as well. So how does that fit in the overall community platform or experience, right? Yeah. Anyone?
Yeah. Well, the simple answer, Mark, is a lot of best practice. So we do have a lot of best practice in terms of how we engage people on communities, both in the types of activities we do with them, the way we involve them, give them recognition, share back things with them, treat it like a relationship, as we say, not a one-night stand kind of traditional market research type thing. And as you saw with the VW case, is involving the client through that process as well, activating those insights, newsletters, conferences, to just let people know that there is a community, to share the insights that are coming off that community, and really actually playing a proactive role in driving customer centricity through the tools that we have, through the communities, through the different things that we bring to bear.
Thanks, Scott. Maz, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, no, I think Scott said it. The two-way interaction. It's a long-term relationship. If people feel valued, if they see their ideas come, I often think about it like this. If I see something in the real place market, in the marketplace that I was involved in launching, I can say to my family member, wow, look, I was involved in that, and that's the ultimate juice of a community. If the community member feels that they can talk to their family members about stuff that they are involved with, that they can see in the real marketplace, they feel the same pride that we do when we launch initiatives, and that's great customer exchange.
Yep, great. Thank you, Maz, and thank you, Scott. So I guess we can wrap up the session. Again, thank you everyone for participating actively and attending our webinar. We will be sending out a follow-up email, including a copy of the recording of the session and a copy of the book zine Customer Journey Revolution. So again, thank you, and I hope we see you again on the 30th of July. Thank you.